I guess my biggest advice would be to reach out to other people. It doesn't have to be professional sporting teams. It can be a local footy team. It might be a semi-professional hockey team, or even an individual player, for instance. I guess there's that massive stigma if it's not in professional sport. It's kind of like, what is it really worth my time? But to me, it's kind of the opposite.
Hello, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome back. Today's guest is Matthew Kahn. Matt, thanks for coming on the show.
Thanks, James. Great to be here. Thanks for inviting me over.
Now, pleasure to have you, mate. It's a crazy world of professional sport. You, of course, the sports scientist there at the Canterbury Bulldogs Rugby League team. You're back. It's kind of full swing, almost, obviously, with all the restrictions. What's the day-to-day life now for you, especially under these conditions? It's obviously slightly different than what it would be normally.
Yeah, absolutely. So I guess apart from my normal duties, there's a lot of other things kind of the NRL have us doing, in terms of coming in, getting our temperature checked, reporting whether we have any sort of cold or flu symptoms. That's obviously another telltale sign. So if anyone even just indicates they've got a cough, for instance, they pretty much get sent straight to Redfern and get tested for coronavirus. So definitely a lot of new things to do, even changing shoes, for instance, and cleaning after every single gym session, for instance.
What do you mean?
Another thing we have
what do you mean clean your shoes?
Be mindful of.
What do you mean clean your shoes?
Oh, pretty much. Well, when we go from field to back indoors, we have to wear two separate shoes, and that. So we bring pretty much 3 pairs of shoes every now and then, and even during game day, they tell us wipe down your game, wipe down your shoes, wipe down this and that. So it's just a very, very strict kind of cleaning protocol at the moment, which is pretty interesting.
Your sponsors would be happy though. A lot of new shoes coming your way.
I hope so. At the moment, mine's kind of deteriorating pretty quickly with all the cleaning, so definitely need to buy a couple of new things.
Yeah, fingers crossed for you, mate. I wanted to talk about your role, because you are basically, a lot of people are studying a degree with sports science in people that are watching this are doing a degree that's either called sports science or exercise in sports science, some sort of variation. You are a sports scientist. You are what people graduate to, or at least study to be able to go and do. Myself, I studied sports science, but I'm not a sports scientist. I'm not I'm not a sports scientist in my day to day. Very different. Obviously, people go strength and conditioning. They go elsewhere. What does a sports scientist look like? What does that role look like on a day to day?
Well, I guess for different sports and even in different sort of teams, the role does change quite a bit. I know from my previous experience working at Souths to what it is here, it's kind of very, very different in how we approach sort of things. But the way in which I kind of undertake my role essentially is that you do have a big area in terms of that performance and that day-to-day running of the players, really. But also in the background, which usually takes a little bit longer, is kind of trying to develop systems and also trying to do a bit of research, which, ultimately you're trying to aid your players be better players essentially and perform at a much better level, I guess. But the main, I guess, if you put it down to a generalization, and I guess it's pretty much trying to make sure that we're getting the most out of our players and in terms of player availability, so that coaches can pick as many people as they can and the best selection really possible.
So when you're saying systems and research, I'm pretty interested, because obviously there's day-to-day areas in there, but day-to-day tasks that you would be looking at. When you're looking at developing systems, what exactly do you mean by that? I know from your background, GPS and obviously your sport, GPS is a massive focal point for you guys. So when you say developing systems, what does that mean in the context of a sports scientist at the moment for you?
Yeah, sure. So I guess the big thing is, it's probably easier to kind of take you through the morning, essentially, is that when we have screening days, or pretty much every single session, we go through a range of a battery of tests to see if, in terms of function and range, the players are, where they should be, essentially, and there's no real kind of niggles that are popping up from other games or last training session, etc. So something that our HP manager and I have been kind of doing a little bit more of is discussing, what are some ways we can action this data better? What are some ways we can actually make it more meaningful for the players to do? So, simple things like getting them to actually input the data themselves and coming out with certain recommendations about what they could be doing, whether it be going to see a physiotherapist or even just doing their own kind of soft tissue manual work is probably one little thing we've been trying to adjust on the go from last year to this year. And same thing goes if something does flag, for instance, someone may pull up with for instance, lessened ankle range of motion, for instance, then, okay, is there a really good explanation as to why that is, or is it kind of a bit innocuous and, there needs to become some kind of further investigation, but ultimately it's trying to get them on the training paddock and reduce, I guess, that risk of injury.
And you would be the person that they would be going to, right? I'm assuming. So if there is a niggle or if there is a flag, it's like, Matt, can you explore this and understand whether it is, a rare, just kind of, to your word, kind of just abnormality, or is this actually a trend of information that we need to be aware of? Is that right? That's where people would come to you for that type of information?
Yeah, exactly. So I guess all the data kind of comes to me in some ways, and it's my job to kind of disseminate that data to the physios, the HP manager, the strength conditioning coaches. There might need to be some modification out on the field or even in the gym, I guess. So for me, it kind of acts in two ways, where you've got the data to help manage these players, but also it does require a bit of intuition and also getting to know the players a lot. Because if someone's always kind of saying, "Oh, I've got a tight hammy," or tight glute, for instance, and that player is not as on top of all his prep work, then and sometimes you kind of ignore it, and some days you kind of just give them a kick to say, "Well, can you actually do a little bit of other stuff to help you get on the field a little bit easier?" I guess so. So it's pretty much disseminating that data that you get and making it kind of worthwhile and meaningful for other people who aren't kind of as versed with data management, really.
Yeah, and I'm sensing there's obviously objective and subjective elements as well, and people skills that you've alluded to just by understanding the players, communicating with them, and then of course communicating that information with the relevant people, like making sure that makes sense for the other stakeholders. You're a Sydney boy. You're a Sydney boy. You studied out of University of Sydney, and I want to take a step back to your first few roles in this environment. I see a few internships. I see a few part-time roles. Obviously, this comes part and parcel with anyone who is in our industry. So anyone who's in our industry is looking at, okay, how can I continue my studies? And then how can I also maximize my practical experience? But I also need to make a living, right? So, I'm seeing your resume and I'm seeing, internships, part-times here, but then part-time at this clinic and then part-time at that clinic. Can you take me back to those days and maybe any sort of words of advice or stories that you have from those times where you're having to juggle so much and you're just essentially just trying to put food on the table, but maximize as much information that you can coming in?
Yeah, absolutely. So as you mentioned, pretty much I have been jumping around a few different part-time or even casual roles here and there. But going back to when I first started, I guess wanting to go to uni and study sports science, I actually wasn't my first preference when I first looked into it. So I was actually looking to try and get into psychology. And then I got shown, sports science at USyd and UNSW. And I thought, okay, this actually is pretty cool to be studying sports and sports performance. So I pretty much applied to go into Sydney Uni, which luckily I got into. And in terms of my background, it was actually away from rugby league, interesting enough, and I was more into swimming back in the day. So competed when I was younger, competed well into my university years, and pretty much had a lot of access into what it meant to be an athlete, from proper nutrition to training scheduling to even stuff like strength conditioning. So that was kind of my first exposure to it all. And in terms of other jobs, essentially, as I said, there were a lot of other things that came about. But in my second year of uni, I kind of said to myself, okay, what essentially do I want to be doing at the end of all this? Degrees only go for 3-4 years. And based on what I've been hearing from other people, it's extremely hard to try and get in the door and actually make a living out of it, which I'm fortunate enough to be able to do. So in my second year, I kind of started sending out feelers to different clubs and sporting codes And pretty much only two clubs actually got back to me, one being South Sydney Rabbitohs and the other being here at the Bulldogs, interesting enough. So I emailed them back again saying, yeah, well, I'd love to get any sort of opportunity, whatever it may be. Funnily enough, the Bulldogs didn't get back to me. And coming around full circle, and I'm actually working with the person that was sitting behind the desk responding to me 5 years later. So it's funny how it kind of ends up that way. And then pretty much after that, that's where I kind of got my foot in the door with South Sydney. Under a guy named Scott Johnson, who I'm still pretty much in close contact with, really. So that's how kind of everything started for me in terms of being in the sporting arena, to eventually where I'm at this moment.
So second year of uni, you had the self-awareness, or you had the knowledge to go, geez, there's only probably 70 jobs per year going around for sports scientists in Australia, and there's about 70 graduates in my cohort alone. When you say feelers, what exactly did you do? Because I think that's oftentimes people are very interested in different ways that other people second, first year are trying to get the attention of, you did a very good job of getting the attention of, someone like the South Sydney. What exactly were your ways in garnering that attention and getting in contact with these people?
Well, I guess the first thing was kind of sending emails or even talking to people that I've known in the sport industry, whether it be through a mutual connection and that. So I guess the easiest thing you can do is send an email and potentially set up time to chat, get a cup of coffee, or whatever it may be. And you actually be pretty surprised with how many people are open to that sort of thing. And you think, well, just because you work in professional sport, they won't actually listen to you. But it's kind of like the opposite. Like, for instance, the past kind of 2 months, I've been reaching out to other practitioners in the field from different sports and different countries and that, and they've been really generous in giving time to actually even just speak to me myself, let alone, offering jobs, etc., I guess. So going back to the whole Bulldogs thing about not being responded to, I guess, I kind of asked them the other day before when I found out about this, is that why didn't you respond back and everything like that? And he goes, well, to be honest, he relies a lot more on word of mouth, more than anything, more than just a resume, more than just generic emails, etc. So really, you can't really, I guess, undervalue that word of mouth kind of exposure, as opposed to just sending out pointless emails or even resumes, etc. Because as you know, James, it's pretty much connection, and also being able to establish relationships with other people is a key aspect of our jobs, and if you can't do that on first contact, then it kind of sets you up to fail later on, I guess.
How do you think people can develop that during their university years? It is very tough to get a word of mouth reference when you've got no mouths that are going to speak for you because you've been around for such a short period of time. So is there any way that, obviously your pathway was via an email, and you did mention some word of mouth. How do you go about generating that referral network, at least initially? Because I'm sure there's a lot of questions that I hear from people that are coming out of university degrees is, how do we get that network going? How do we get that word of mouth? And ultimately, how do we get that referral?
So I guess the big thing is volunteering your time. It's hard to say, it's hard to hear working for free at times, but unfortunately in our industry, it's kind of the way you kind of start out and develop that rapport with people and players, and someone who's generating that word of mouth that is so vital later on in your career. So my biggest advice would be to reach out to other people. It doesn't have to be professional sporting teams. It can be your local footy team. It might be a semi-professional hockey team, or even an individual player, for instance. I guess there's that massive stigma if it's not in professional sport. It's kind of like, what is it really worth my time? But to me, it's kind of the opposite. He's alluding to, I guess, my time back at Souths. I didn't actually start out straight from first grade. I started out 20s program. So, in some ways, working in a kind of a less professional environment, or even less resources, I guess I should say, you get exposed to a lot of other things that in some ways will make you employable down the track. So even things like, for instance, I learned how to strap, I learned how to massage, I learned what goes on in logistics for game day, for instance, things like that. And just going back to your original question, it's volunteering your time is the biggest thing. You can't really expect to finish uni and then come out saying, oh, okay, I'm ready, here I am, where's the jobs? Unfortunately, it doesn't work that way. So start early, that's probably the biggest thing, and that's what I guess I try to do, is start early. So my first exposure to professional sport was when I was 19 years old, and now I'm 27, so I've been in the industry for about 8 years now, which is still relatively young in comparison to other people I've worked with or know. But essentially, I like to think getting that foot in the door is a big aspect to being able to get employment down the track. Not necessarily guarantee you 100% of the time, but it's a start over a lot of other, I guess, candidates or even other graduates coming out of university degrees and doing extended work in the masters or even the PhD, for instance. So that's something I've tried to impart with a lot of the students I supervise now. So I've got 4 of them from UCID. And already, the way I see it, they're ahead of the pack because they've reached out, they've gotten through, they've got some experience. And the great thing is they're actually doing some really good work here at the club as well.
Mate, that's full circle for you. From prac student to now looking after the prac student. That's awesome. I am interested in what you said
Exactly
there.
right.
You spoke about, like, yeah, it doesn't necessarily matter if it's not elite. It doesn't mean that you're doing any less work. And I hear that echoing around the industry more so now, which I think is a really important conversation. And I like hearing that that's happening. What I'm really interested in is, from your perspective, how much has transitioned and carried over. So when you say that, okay, just because it's not in the elite doesn't mean it doesn't matter. What type of skills did you learn? I know you mentioned, you got a different diverse amount of skills, which was eventually helpful, but what was there any sort of in particular skills, in particular lessons that you learned when you were working with the semi-elite environment that then helped you with the transition? Or is it just a case of, I get to see so much stuff, like I get so much breadth of experience that it means that I'm ready to go when it's time to work in the elite? What was so beneficial about working in that sub-elite environment?
Yeah, so I guess starting off with, being employable, as I mentioned before, it's a big thing. It's if you're looking at 2 resumes or even heard of 2 different people, one being, say, they're both sports scientists, but the other person has more experience in other things, whether it be in management skills, for instance, or even they have a history in strength and conditioning or psychology, then, in some ways it's kind of a no-brainer. If you're looking at just 2 pieces of paper, you kind of go for the person that has a lot more experience and skill, essentially. And in terms of, going back to working in a semi-professional environment, your mindset kind of shifts a little bit more, as opposed to if you started at the peak, I guess, of sport and then coming back down, or vice versa, where, for instance, with the 20s program, you're kind of exposed, you don't really have a lot of exposure to be able to train them as much, because they're either train in the morning, they'll come back, they'll go and work for a full day or even study for a full day. And then pretty much they'll come back in the afternoon and train again. So, that period of 1 hour in the morning and then 3 hours at night is crucial to these players. So being able to get as much as you can out of them is really is key, I guess, because you're so strapped for time. So that's kind of helped me, I guess, apply that mindset. It's what will give them the most benefit out of the minimum amount of stimulus, essentially. And then further on to that, I guess, in terms of acquiring tech or even implementing certain protocols, for instance, it's like, okay, will this be worthwhile for players in the lower grades versus in the higher grades, essentially? So you apply that mentality. Is it practical? Is it feasible? Will it give you a lot of information for the small amount of work that you have to do? So I guess I would not have come across that if I'd gone the other way around and worked with first grade and then came to a semi-professional environment. So I really try and bring that along in terms of my experience into my role now, essentially.
Oh, that's fantastic. And I see you started a PhD. Is that right?
Yeah, that's right. I thought I was done with university.
It's almost a death wish.
So it's some days it does feel like that.
Yes.
So at the moment, I'm kind of going through a systematic review, and it's just taking a very long time to do this. There's a lot of refinements, and there's been a lot of work done, for instance, in the acute to chronic workload ratio sector. So it's being up to date with that, and also trying to make my review a bit more individual in some ways. So yeah, well, when I finished my master's a couple of years ago, I thought maybe that's it. I'm not going to do any more study. I've had enough of it. And then coming here, it's like, well, it's worthwhile. I'm doing a lot more kind of internal research here at the Dogs. It's like, why not kind of extend it and get something out of it in the long run? So, yeah, crazy enough to jump into a PhD, which pretty much about a year into it now. So definitely early days for myself as a researcher anyway. But again, it adds that, I was mentioned before, another skill set to my resume in the long run.
No, that's exactly what I was going to ask, and I commend you for it, mate. You're better man than me. Me and academics don't really go too well together. Kind of like oil and water. So very 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 commendable. So yeah, from a professional perspective, and kind of what you alluded to, was that something where you looked at? Of course, by the sounds of it, you're doing some internal research and you just got curious. Like, I think that's really what drives a lot of research, is just curiosity. But from a professional development perspective, was this something where you went, okay, this is a new challenge, and this is something that will, to use your words before, put me ahead of the pack as I continue my career? What was more of the driving factor? Was it any of those two, or was it something else as well?
I think it was a bit of everything, to be honest. Like in kind of naturally, I'm more of a curious person. If I see something being done, it's like I kind of question it in my head and saying, well, okay, why are they doing it this way? And if that is the case, okay, how can I apply it to what I'm doing with my players, essentially? So, massive bit of curiosity there, but also a bit of a challenge for myself, essentially. I think that, this day and age, I'm pretty much managed my time pretty well here at work. So I said, well, okay, might as well get further in my career. I think in some ways a PhD is becoming the new norm. A good 20 years ago, 10, 15 years ago, like an undergraduate was enough before. Now, the last 5, 10 years, there's been a massive spike in the amount of people coming out with masters, a master in high performance sport or master in strength conditioning. And now as a sports scientist, it's kind of like, okay, everyone's coming out with a PhD. So that was essentially wasn't my only motivation for doing it. As I said, I really wanted to challenge myself, and I think that research was another element for me to tackle head on, I guess.
That was actually one of I've heard the story before, but Vince Skelly told me at UQ, when I was at UQ, he went, if you want to be a sports scientist at a club, basically the new norm is a PhD. So you better get comfortable here, mate. And that's when, the non-academic inside of me was like, I might need to kind of just shift my career path a little bit. I don't know if the sports science route or the direct sports science route is for me. But yeah, no, certainly interesting. And it certainly is a trend. The people that are getting the jobs are the ones with, the PhD next to their name. I'm really interested in hearing how, for you, going through your journey from the intern work to paid work at, the Sydney Uni, to now intern work at the Souths and paid work at Souths, and then getting the full-time gig and basically kind of living every kid's dream, which is being paid to work in sport to a certain extent. What words of advice do you have for people that are watching and people that want to be able to live out a similar dream, and that is essentially be able to get paid to work in sport?
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely. So I guess that first bit of advice I mentioned before was being employable. A lot of people in the employing position kind of look at and say, okay, what can I get from this particular candidate? So I guess the big thing is having a specialty, but also not being too specialized in a certain field. I think Sam Robertson might have spoke about this, about being a generalist as well at times. So you're a generalist, but also with a specialty area. So that way, in some ways, it's like no one can and do your job. It's pretty much made for you specifically. So that's probably the first one. Secondly, don't underestimate the value of networking and word of mouth. It's pretty much who trusts you to do those roles, and how you're going to do those roles, essentially. And probably the biggest thing for me is that I was lucky. I was pretty fortunate enough to have this. Is the importance of having really good mentors that will help you guide you, professionally and also personally. It actually lets you do things on a day-to-day basis more than just being told do this, but no kind of ability to explore or even to learn from your mistakes at times as well. So the good thing is I still communicate with my first mentor, Scott, at the moment. I spoke to him a couple of months ago when it came to contract negotiations. It's like, well, how do you go about it? I was like, what did you do? What pieces of advice did you do? in some ways it kind of established that growth mindset as well. So never being quick to criticize someone in terms of how they do things, and then always pursuing kind of bigger and better things. Essentially, I guess those are probably the three main things I probably share with a lot of other recent graduates or even people at uni at the moment.
Yeah, and some of that advice definitely translates through not just the young graduates or people just starting in the industry, but kind of really, anyone in the industry and could even cross over into different industries as well. I know you wanted to have a little bit of a talk about maybe how COVID has changed your thinking, or some thoughts that around job security based off of what has happened in recent events. What exactly did you want to touch on there?
Yeah, so I guess, at the back of everyone's mind that works in professional sport is that, okay, what if I lost my job tomorrow? And the sad reality is a lot of people are either still in that position or pretty much returning to some type of normality, but it's pretty much the early of the two, to be honest. I've seen some really good practitioners losing their jobs just because of pay cuts in a particular professional environment, or they've chose to walk away from the sporting arena altogether just because that job security is a big issue in our kind of, pretty much in our field, essentially. So it's kind of forced me to think about ways of, okay, well, if I lost my job tomorrow, do I have anything to help me get along, to pay the bills, to pay the rent, whatever it may be? So, investing time in other things that will help set me up in future in the long run if something does go south, for instance. So which is where kind of the PhD comes in handy in some ways when hopefully I do finish it. Is there a job later on in academia, for instance? And, I guess it comes out with another piece of advice for students is that don't put all your eggs in that one basket. Sometimes I know it's a bit grim sometimes, but that's the reality. As I said, I've seen some really good practitioners let go, and they're generally really, really good people as well. So it just wasn't a fit at the club, for instance, at the time. So definitely have that drive, have that passion to pursue a career in sport, but also have that backup as well for just in case. Essentially, it's better being safe than sorry in the end.
And save the money while it's coming in. I don't want to make it a finance channel, but try and maximize the savings as best you can while it's coming in. The other consideration also that I think about often, and I speak to people in the Olympic environment. They have a different type of season. You guys, in the professional sporting world, it's 12 months where they've got a full Olympic cycle. Well, not right now, but they've got a normal full Olympic cycle. So, has that ever been a consideration for you? Is a different type of, yes, sports science, but maybe a different type of industry? Was that something that came to your mind when you were thinking about job security?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, as I mentioned before, my earlier careers, I was exposed more to swimming, more so than the other sport, and that follows the Olympic cycle. And during my time at Sydney Uni, when I was doing a bit of work there, during my earlier years, I got exposed to a lot of other sports. For instance, rowing, netball, AFL, rugby union, etc. So they're pretty much a bit of best of both worlds, but it does open that opportunity as well. They don't know track. Have I thought of it at the moment? Not so much. I'm pretty content with where I'm at the moment in terms of job wise. So, if opportunities do lead me down that path to be working with Olympic sports, Olympic athletes, really, then I definitely will be up for taking that challenge, I guess. I'm always up for new things too.
Fascinating, mate. I know we have 30 minutes. I've taken 4 extra minutes of your time. I know it's a very full-on environment in the professional sporting world, especially right now with all the things that you need to do. So I'm very thankful for you taking this time to have a chat. Was there anything further that you wanted to get off your chest, mate, before we jump off?
No, mate, to be honest, thanks, James. It's fantastic, the kind of work you're doing here. I know that if I was on the other end of this as a young undergraduate, I definitely appreciate a lot of the different speakers that you've got, all the way from university academia all the way through to, other levels of sport, essentially, and I wish I was equipped with this sort of knowledge from the very beginning. So I think you're doing some really great work there, James.
No, thank you, mate. Really appreciate it. That's the ethos of what we're trying to do here. kind of picturing myself at 18 and like exactly as you said, word for word. So appreciate that you can see what I'm trying to do here. Ladies and gents, that's all we have time for today. Thank you again for tuning in. If you're liking it and you want to subscribe, you can click up there. And if you want to watch our last interview, which Matt referenced with Sam Robertson, you can click right there to watch that. For Matt, my name is James, and thank you very much for joining us today.